Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Not going to want to miss a bit of the wow. The wow. I got to tell you, my email box, my DM box, full of crazy. It seems that the world is losing its mind, and our Republican friends are leading us down that path. But I want to start with something pretty good today. The families, the Sandy Hook families, evidently they have settled with Remington, marking the very first time a gun manufacturer has been held liable for a mass shooting. Now, this is a pretty important moment, I think, because they've never allowed this. They've never done this before. They have never taken responsibility in any way, shape, or form. Now, part of me, and I don't know what all the details are, I know that Remington's agreed to pay $73 million. That is something. I don't know how many, NDAs are going to be out there and how much this is now going to be gag ordered. Was this a moment of convenience? You go, hey, here's some money, go away, shut up, have your moment, and it'll pass. Or if there's going to be something here that it's going to have a long-term effect. Don't know, not claiming to know, but interesting that this is the first time that one of these gun companies have taken even a little bit of responsibility. Now, on the other hand, look, gun good. At least that's what's coming out of Arizona, where a state legislator there, a representative named Cunning, he has put forth a piece of legislation that would require every student to participate in the Arizona gun safety program. Now, according to Guyan, it's going to have nothing to do with the NRA, nothing, except the fact that they're going to use the Eddie Eagle gun safety program, which you know it is the NRA's program. That's something they've been using for decades. And look, not something I'm horribly against, not something I'm opposed to. Do find it interesting though. We're going to get the guns into the hands of kids because the NRA started this program for preschoolers. This is who Eddie Eagle was. For preschool to third grade, because we had to get that gun culture in their mind under the guise of we're keeping kids safe. And as a parent, I'm going, what could be wrong with the idea of teaching a little gun safety? My immediate response is not negative. My immediate response is educationally maybe, until you find out, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, it really doesn't do anything. It's ineffective in the real world, they say. And now you've got the other argument that what you're doing is you're furthering this gun culture. And I'm looking at that and going, yeah, I can see that. I still bring it back to the home where, we should be doing that ourselves. But here's the thing. I had an interesting day today. Started off the day, had to run some errands. So I'm in the car listening to why everything that's going wrong is Joe Biden's fault. Why didn't Joe Biden unite the nation? And I'll tell you, I felt like my IQ dropped a couple of points as I spent listening to the right wing chaos merchants. They were just going on and on. Everything is Joe Biden's fault. Most of the stuff they were talking about happened in 2020. Biden wasn't president yet, but never mind. But I had to listen to them go on about, what's going on in Canada and how, this is just, this is just, the tyranny and how it's, we need to water the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants and patriots and how these folks in Canada are patriots and going all down this line and, just every bizarre statement you can come across. And I'm sitting here going, you do realize what the issue is. And what I find interesting is none of the commentaries that I heard were about the actual issue. It was about freedom. And I go, well, those truck drivers have the freedom. They have the freedom to not cross into the U.S. That's the issue. And they have the freedom to not do it. They can drive anywhere else they want. They just can't cross into the U.S. because we've done such a bad job of containing the virus and dealing with it here that Trudeau and the Canadians don't want it brought back. That makes sense to me on a certain... We're hearing nobody. This is about freedom. Never about the actual issue. Look, you have the freedom not to do it. If you do want to cross back and forth, you need to get the vaccine. Now, interestingly enough, the chaos merchants, the outrage candy machine, they keep telling us it's about freedom and how this is, overreaching government. Have you tried to go into another country and not have the right vaccines? Have you tried to get into another country and then try and bring something back into the U.S.? Have you tried doing it? And of course not, because we don't understand how all this works. And I'm just, it's about the moment. It's about the situational ethic. And I've been hammered with people going, Rick, you're a labor guy. You should be in favor of this. And I am in favor of people protesting, without question. I'm in favor of people taking over their capitals, because I've done it a couple of times. I'm in favor of seeking redress of grievances from your government. A small minority of people shouldn't be allowed to shut the country's economic system down. And the majority of people have rights too. And anytime that I've been part of a protest, anytime I've been part of this, I've understood that as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, a little bit about a lot today, the stuff that's going on, the right-wing money going into all of the insanity that we're seeing. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, former Illinois Congressman Joe Walsh is going to be here to pick up on the trucker convoy, maybe get some of his thoughts. Maybe he's going to go on the freedom rant. Maybe for him, someone who did a lot of the freedom stuff, maybe he's going to surprise me and go, no, Rick, you're wrong. We should be out there marching arm in arm. We'll find out. Going to take a quick break. If you missed any of the program, podcast, ricksmithshow.com. Any of your podcast sites, grab it there. Also, you can give us a yell, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people from the top. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I got to tell you, the outrage merchants today were all over the map. And one of the places that, again, I found most interesting was Fox News, who had somebody I think is a smart guy, a Georgetown law professor, somebody who's argued, I think, in front of the Supreme Court. But Fox News' legal analyst, this Jonathan Turley, going on about Trudeau using the emergency powers and how they're dealing with the freedom fighters. He said, by Trudeau doing what he's doing, he said by this rationale they could have cracked down on the civil rights movement. They could have arrested Dr. Martin Luther King. Did you know they could have arrested King for this disobedience stuff? Never mind the reality and the fact that he was arrested 29 times. And he wrote the letters from the Birmingham jail and it was actually in jail. Never mind that. But this is the kind of ridiculousness we're subjected to. Here to share some thoughts on the big convoy, and maybe he'll disagree with me. I've asked our good friend, former Illinois Congressman and presidential candidate in 2020, Joe Walsh, to come talk with us. He hosts the White Flag podcast. Make sure you check that out. White Flag with Joe Walsh. Anywhere where you get your podcast, you can find Joe. Joe, thanks for taking time for us, buddy.
Hey, Rick, I always like to be with you, my friend.
So give me your take right from the start on the Freedom Convoy. I want to get your take before we jump into the middle of it.
I think the most important point to make, and look, I'm all about people protesting. I'm all about civil disobedience. I get all of that. The biggest point to make, though, is that, and I come from the world of right-wing media, it's all about pissing off their audience. It's all about creating outrage and inflaming people. And whether it's what's going on up in Canada or it's this noise about Hillary spying on Trump, it's all about riling up their audience. And the truth doesn't matter. The truth does not matter.
Yeah, and this is where I've been. And look, I'm somebody like you. Look, I was in Wisconsin 11 years ago today, shutting down their capital. I was with another 150,000 people in Madison. I've been on protests. I've been to all of these things. And you understand that there are consequences for actions. I am all in favor of them doing this. My problem is the right-wing anger machine, the outrage candy folks, they're not talking about what the issue is. And the issue is these truck drivers have the freedom not to cross the border into the U.S. That's what this comes down to. This isn't a blanket, every truck driver in the country has to be vaccinated. It's the ones who come into the U.S. and come back. That's the issue. And what we should be looking at is, why did they do that? How bad have we boogered things up that the Canadians are going, no, you're coming back from the U.S. We can't have you come back without quarantining.
Yeah, but you know what, Rick? This Canadian thing, to me, the Freedom Convoy, it's almost a distraction, or it's the latest example of, from the very beginning of this once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, at every freaking stage of this, the right-wing anger machine that I was a part of, they've been, it's a hoax. COVID's not real. Masks are bad. Don't lock us down. The vaccines are BS. At every stage of this thing, they've been opposite of doing the right thing. And this is just more of it.
Yeah. Do you see this? Do you see this coming here? And I look at Dan Crenshaw. He is a representative from Texas. He's saying, no, all you Canadian truckers, just come here to the U.S. Just come and stay. We'll get you a visa. Don't worry about it. Come on down here.
And a former colleague, Rick, Eric Bolling, who's now on Newsmax, crazy Newsmax that I used to be on, he's talking about 1,000 American truckers are gonna send their rigs to D.C. to protest vaccine mandates here in America. What mandates? I'm serious. What mandates are they protesting here? There are none.
Well, that's because, again, as you've pointed out, truth doesn't matter. As long as you can keep people riled up and angry at something, because there are still people who believe that Biden is mandating everyone to get a vaccine, even though the Supreme Court shot that down and it is done. They still want to keep people all bunched up in the panties and angry, and this is a way to do it. And look, who is right-wing talk radio's audience? Who's talk radio's audience? The trucking industry. It's the reason I started this show almost 17 years ago, because all my trucker buddies were losing their freaking minds.
Hey, Rick, you said something there that's really important that we can't scoot by. You and I disagree politically. You and I could spend hours debating issues. MSNBC is biased to the left. CNN leans left. Fox News is well right. But the important point here is the truth. And this is Trump's legacy, and right-wing media, from where I come from, has picked it up. Forget about bias. They don't deal in basic truths anymore. This is a much more dangerous place than just being biased.
No, and I just had this conversation with a friend today. I was saying, look, it used to be Fox News would start with a kernel of truth. There would be a kernel of truth to whatever story they made. Now they're just pulling stuff out of whichever orifice you want to imagine and spinning a yarn that is, wow, quite impressive. And look, whoever is writing their tales, give them, gold star, because it keeps my friends all in a tizzy. I'll tell you that.
Well, and Rick, they're all in unison. They're all in sync. Every talk radio station you turn on, Fox News, all the rest of them, they are all singing from the same hymnal. And the MSNBCs and ABCs and NBCs and CBSs of the world, they're not all on the same page. And that's a problem.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I've been telling people for years, having done this job for as long as I have, and have known people in right-wing spaces, that the think tanks of the right, the state policy network think tanks, they write this stuff out. They've got issue of the day. In fact, I get some of them. You want to talk about Biden inflation. You want to talk about, the supply chains. I get, here's the talking point. Here's a story that you can use. Here's a guest that you can come on and talk about. And here are the questions to ask them. The right wing understands that this space, more than ever, is political theater. They're putting on a presentation to get the message, whatever message of the day is, and do it in a way for maximum outrage, and that everyone really is on the same page.
Well, and Rick, to be fair, I think most media platforms do a variation of that. Look, I'm on MSNBC a lot. I love going on MSNBC, but they generally have a playbook. But again, the difference here is the Fox Newses of the world, the right-wing media platform, screw the truth. I mean, Tucker Carlson and the rest of them, Rick, they blew right through the truth. The truth doesn't matter, man. That's dangerous, dangerous territory.
Yeah. For me, it's about the talk radio space. I know a lot of, individual talk radio hosts who, they get their marching orders, and you're right. Everyone's singing out of the same hymnal. You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Joe Walsh, former Illinois Congressman and host of the White Flag with Joe Walsh podcast. We'll get links out on social media, how you can take a look at that, or just go to wherever you get your podcasts. Also, make sure you look for our podcast anywhere where you get them. But Joe, here's the thing. I was listening today, and they're going on about this Durham report. And, I'm going, where's this coming from? What I want to know is, where's the charge? I mean, we've got a nice story. There's a whole bunch of intrigue, and, they were spying on them. This sounds like one of those bad 80s novels when the Cold War was still going on that they want us to buy into. Or am I missing the main point here?
I don't understand what the main point is. I honestly don't understand what the story is. And everything I've read, forget about what you listen to on Fox News or talk radio. When you actually read what we know so far, it's nothing. Could it be something? Maybe, but it's nothing right now. They're lying about it. Tucker Carlson and these talk radio people are lying about it right now. Jesse Waters on Fox News was on earlier tonight and basically said Hillary should be locked up, thrown out of the country because she committed treason spying on Trump. That's an out and out lie, but that's what they're putting out.
Yeah. Now, for me, if that were true, if Durham had the evidence to do this, he would have moved forward on an indictment. That's how our system works. But conveniently enough, as I understand this, statute of limitations have run out, and conveniently enough, just in time for him to come out with this claim to create this kind of it's all this nefarious plot. Hillary was spying on Trump. I actually heard a guy today saying this. Hillary was spying on Trump while he was in the White House. I'm going, what are you talking about?
Hey, Rick, 4 years ago, I'm on the radio, a couple hundred stations around the country, and damn near in right-wing talk radio, and damn near every caller I got was the same. Obama is spying on Trump. 4 years later, look what they're doing. Now it's Hillary was spying on Trump. I don't know who it will be in 4 years from now.
No, it's just crazy. But, this is one of those things where you just go, there's so much chaos going on. There's so much insanity. The average voter is being just hammered with crazy all the time. And my thought process is this is deliberate to get people to turn away, to say, you know what, I want to be able to do what I can control. I don't care about voting. I don't care about politics. Just leave me alone. I think that's part of the plan.
And Rick, it works, and it's working. And unless something dramatically changes, Kevin McCarthy will be the next Speaker of the House. Republicans will take over the House and the Senate, because I can tell you, because I hear from hundreds of Republican voters every day who are generally angry at me now, they're fired up. They can't wait to vote. Democrats, moderates, not so much. That's a real problem.
Yeah, and it's one of these things where, I keep listening to the right wing talk about, why hasn't Joe Biden united the country? And I'm going, explain how that works when we've got you out here every day saying what a horrible person he is and how every problem is his problem. In fact, there was one of the Fox News people blathering on about how, in 2020, Joe Biden did all this stuff. He was responsible for the lockdown. And you go, wait a second, he was candidate Biden at that time. What you're talking about is Trump. They've forgotten Trump was in office, and everything that's happened ever is now Joe Biden's fault.
Rick, the Republican Party base, the real mega cult from where I come from, it's about 35 to 40% of the country, and they're really fired up. Biden's job, though, is to fire up the other 60 to 65% of the country. 81 million people in 2020 voted for Biden, not because they like Biden, but because they were scared to death of Trump. And so many of those people right now are going to sit at home. Most of America doesn't like Trump. If they vote in 2022, the Republicans won't win. But right now, they're not expected to vote.
So is the answer to get out there and start? Because I've been saying, I don't know what the Democrats are waiting for. The sky is literally falling. There are those of us who believe 2022 could be the last free and fair election most of us get to see for a while. Why am I not seeing a sense of urgency coming out of the White House or out of leadership? Why am I not seeing them, getting out and throwing a couple of punches at least?
Rick, I don't hear Democrat elected officials speak like you do or speak like I do. And look, I like Joe Biden, nice enough guy, but he's not capable of conveying that sense of urgency. I have not heard one Democratic leader convey that sense of urgency. And unless they do, I think they're in for a world of hurt this year.
Yeah, it's going to be a long election cycle if things continue, and we don't get some actual things done. Thank you, Joe Manchin. But it is what it is. But Joe, I appreciate you taking some time for us. As always, great talking with you. I hope folks will check out the podcast, White Flag with Joe Walsh. Find that wherever you grab your podcasts. We'll get links out on social media. But Joe, I hope you'll come back and talk with us again real soon.
Always keep fighting, brother.
Thanks so much, our good friend Joe Walsh. Again, make sure you grab the podcast there, wherever you get yours. The reality in this is simple, very simple. Democrats, get your head out of your behinds. Get out there and get with the message. I truly believe this could be, if things go the way the Republicans want, this could be the last free and fair election we see for some time. That's not a good thing. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back after this. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1910. That was the day the uprising of the 20,000 officially ended in New York City. As many as 30,000 young, predominantly immigrant Jewish women went back to work after a bitter 11-week strike. They faced down their bosses, the police, and the courts. Arrests and fines drained much of the union's funds. Young union leaders like Clara Lemlich had been arrested 17 times and suffered 6 broken ribs. Women garment workers spent most of the winter running to union meetings, handing out out leaflets, walking picket lines, raising funds, and distributing strike benefits. Many smaller shops settled in workers' favor early on in the strike. But by mid-February, closed shop demands kept many workers on the picket lines. The strike ended with partial but real victories. Garment workers won the 52-hour work week, 4 paid holidays, employer-paid tools and materials, collectively bargained wages, and more. The International Lady Garment Workers Union started the strike with 100 members and had 20,000 by the end. All but 14 of the city's 353 shops signed contracts. But many garment workers continued to face unsafe working conditions like locked doors and flimsy or non-functioning fire escapes. Safety-related demands would not be addressed until after the 60,000-strong cloakmakers strike the following summer. One of the largest factories and worst offenders was the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. Workers there went back with no agreement. 147 would die a year later in a tragic fire. In the aftermath, basic fire safety principles were finally established and implemented in New York State workplaces. These formed the foundations for many modern-day fire safety practices, like exit signs and doors, better ventilation, and sprinkler systems, fire alarms, and drills.
In this year's Olympics, the top team performance has been corporate America's breathtaking double-twist ethical backflip. This group of corporate giants loudly tout their code of ethics, pledging to stand against repressive regimes that abuse human rights. But here came the Beijing Olympics, posing a direct test, and they flopped. Human rights advocates worldwide had asked that corporations withhold their sponsorship of the propagandistic use of the Olympics by China's brutally oppressive rulers. CEOs were simply asked not to endorse a Chinese dictatorship that is routinely committing acts of genocide and political suppression against Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kong citizens, and others under their rule. Corporate leaders would not even have to speak out or publicly stand up to the oppressors. Just don't show up. Don't pay millions of their shareholders' dollars to link arms and reputations with rank repression. Well, if you've watched any of the Olympic broadcasts, you've seen which side corporate America chose. They've done a collective backflip from the high ethical bar of human rights into the pits of crass, unprincipled commercialism. A who's who of America's corporate all-stars are flying their flags in Beijing, having paid more than $1 billion to strut their stuff as sponsors of the regime's Olympic show. It looks bad, though, to admit that they value money over humanity, so sponsors are piously proclaiming that sports should not be politicized. As one put it, offending China's autocrats, quote, would not advance the cause of sport in which our commitment lies. Really? How sporting is genocide? Another barked that, quote, nobody cares what happens to Uyghurs, okay? No, it's not okay, and also not true. Yet another declared ski and sport have no business in politics. It's common sense. This is Jim Hightower saying, no, it's cowardice.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. You want to weigh in on the trucker convoy for freedom. Should we bring them here? Should we do like Crenshaw wants to do and bring all those truckers who don't want to be vaccinated? Let them just come into the U.S. and stay. We'll get them visas. Can we do that? Here's the problem with that. I don't think that they would, because this is the hysterical part. They've got national health care. They're not going to come work here in an environment where they got crappy health care. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. But I look at the legal expert analysis, and this Jonathan Turley, who is a brilliant guy by all documentation. Him saying that the crackdown. This crackdown that they're doing would amount to black people in the U.S. during the civil rights era being arrested. His exact quote, by this rationale, they could have cracked down on the civil rights movement. They could have arrested Martin Luther King. Now, King was arrested 29 times. Like I said, letters from a Birmingham jail were behind bars. In fact, I was able to put my hands on those bars. We were in Birmingham, Alabama at the Civil Rights Museum there. And again, check out our Black History Month podcasts from Birmingham. Those are just, incredible. This really is, for me, Exhibit A on why maybe we do need to have Black History Month. Maybe why we do need to teach history in the classroom. Maybe why we need to do a better job of educating our young, because evidently our really smart people are really dumb. He's of the age, he's older than I am. And look, I remember seeing videos of, historical videos of people being, hit with fire hoses and bodies tumbling down the road. I remember Bull Connor's tank. In fact, I was able to put my hand on one of his tanks. I remember seeing videos of the dogs being sigged on people and biting people. But what's going on in Canada? That is tyranny. The Canadian police have been the nicest police you can imagine. There's been no violence. Do you know why we had violence during a lot of the Black Lives Matter protests? Because police were pushing it. When you show up in riot gear, when you show up and start shooting tear gas, when you take heavy-handed measures, you're met with heavy-handed resistance. That's the interesting part in this for me. They're not doing that in Canada. No, they're saying, look, you don't move these trucks. We could take your insurance. You don't move these trucks. We could do a lot of things. And, it seems like, we need a good dose of history lesson. We need a good dose of sanity. Just my thought. Let's go to the phone lines. Got Alice on line one. Alice, how are you today?
I'm good. Like you, and I'm a little bit older than you, I'll be 62, I distinctively remember watching with my dad on the news of the white people in the South turning the fire hoses and the dogs and saying all kind of nasty things. So, yeah, the right wing really definitely needs to get their history under control.
This is the reason that you don't throw Marjorie Taylor Greene off the Education Committee. I would love to ask Representative Gazpacho about her view on this comment. What do you think, Representative? I would love for her to just go on in detail about her ignorance of the civil rights movement and all of this. I think that would be entertaining, if nothing other than educational.
Oh, absolutely. We could write a whole book on some of her answers. Have a good evening, Rick.
Thank you so much, Alice. Appreciate it. No, look, it's amazing. And this is supposed to be one of our smarter people. Crazy times we live in. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, going to be here to share some thoughts on, some of the Super Bowl commercials, some of the push for electric vehicles, some of the rebuilding of our manufacturing base. Good stuff on the other side. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. Think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So if you watch the Super Bowl on Sunday, and I got to tell you, lots of commercials for electric vehicles, I saw something for DeLoreans coming back. DeLorean Motors is talking about building an EV. And I'm going, for those of us who grew up in the 80s, the DeLorean was kind of that. It was kind of that car that everybody wanted. Nobody could get their hands on, but everybody wanted it. And now the great part of this is you don't even need to wait for a thunderbolt to come, and you don't need to wait for lightning and try and figure out how to string it up to where the car hits it at the right speed. We can have an electric vehicle at some point in the near future without all of that. And here to share some thoughts on the possibilities and the exciting time we're moving into, I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, the website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it is great to be with you as always. And I love those DeLoreans too. So iconic.
Yeah, I'm looking at this and I'm going, wouldn't it be great to be able to have one of those things in an electric version? I mean, we're kind of living the future. We don't have to go back to the future. Yeah. We're living the future.
Right. Yeah. We are. The car companies, try to establish trends during their Super Bowl ads. And it was electric, literally. I mean, I think 6 out of the 7 car companies had ads for electric vehicles. I love the one for the Chevy Silverado, the Sopranos theme, just because I love the Sopranos show, and it was great to see the young actors and actresses all grown up. But that was pretty wild. But here's the important thing, is that this is catching on. Okay, this is catching on. This is catching on with consumers. The EVs now are 9% market share. They had been 2%, and that's growing exponentially. You see lots of companies that have made announcements, Ford, GM, but a lot of the foreign-based companies that have production facilities in the United States as well, about manufacturing electric vehicles. You see the government leading the way with policy. And I will just add that, if you want an electric F-150, you have to wait, unfortunately, because I think Ford took 200,000 orders, and they're booked up for production. They have to find more space to make these things. So it's, I think it's good. And obviously the key to me, it's great that they're electric from a carbon perspective, and not emitting greenhouse gases, but jobs. This is about jobs too. And I think that companies, the union, the UAW, other auto supply unions, and the administration understand that to do this right has to be made in America as well. It's not enough to be green. It needs to be green and blue collar, made in the USA, red, white, and blue. And so that's what a lot of the policy that the Biden administration has been churning out is designed to do. And I'm encouraged by what we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Biden legacy. If you look back in a couple of years, I think this is going to be one of the centerpieces that he's moved us in this direction. And we needed to. We needed the leadership. We needed the policy. We needed the investment to do this. And more important for me is, and if we keep to it, so far, not been bad, but keep with that. We've got to make it here. We've got to reward companies who stay here in the U.S., who build here, who create good American jobs that people can raise their families and sustain on, instead of chasing the most exploitable labor and the most climate-destroying environmental policies. We need to do it here and do it right.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it is important to make sure these are good jobs, that it is made in America. I think that builds support for the idea of electric vehicles. Also, to have a charging infrastructure that is as available to someone as gas stations are now, which is part of the challenge we have in scaling this up. And I also think that, while Ford, GM, weren't the fastest off the marks with this, obviously Tesla, from market share perspective in EVs in particular, had a virtual monopoly over this market for a couple of years. That's going to change, and I think that particularly the pickup trucks, the SUVs, that GM Ford is going to roll out with union labor, and a heavy unionized supply chain as well. I think those are the things that are going to they're going to both catch up and surpass Tesla, and will bring a lot of this out from the coasts. Like in Washington, D.C., I see Teslas every day when I'm visiting my in-laws in the Bay Area and in San Francisco. In San Francisco area, same thing. But in between, you see some of them, right? But not a lot. And so I think the pickup trucks are going to fill that void. So it's pretty cool. It's an exciting time to be part of not only the policy of trying to get this right, but also being in the business of making these vehicles, because it is transformational.
Yeah, and look, I come back to the investment part. We invested. Yeah. We're investing in this as a country, and policy is doing this. And I had someone go, well, Tesla didn't need any investment from the government. He got a $500 million loan from the government. Yeah. He got a lot to start Tesla. This wasn't he dreamt this up and funded it on his own. He got some seed money from We the People. And look, I'm in favor of that. That's how businesses can be helped, and we can start industries. But we can't pick and choose on who we say did it one way or did it another. Just my thought.
Yeah, exactly. The idea that Tesla and Elon Musk somehow did this without any support whatsoever is ridiculous. There were massive tax credits, first of all, to purchase these vehicles, to bring down the cost somewhat. They moved into an abandoned factory that GM and Toyota had moved out of in Fremont, California. And so they had a facility right there and a workforce, by the way, that knew how to do this stuff. And as you mentioned, they got some of those Department of Energy assistance as well. And so it's not like they were able to create this out of thin air. They got help. And so there would still be a tax credit under what the Biden administration, Democrats in Congress want to do with respect to electric vehicle purchases. There'd be a tax credit for buying a Tesla, but it would be a better tax credit if you're buying one that's also made by a company that pays a fair wage and recognizes the right to organize.
Tesla's got some interesting labor problems going on right now, but that's a discussion for another time. I did want to get some of your thoughts, because last year we passed a $1 trillion trade deficit, first time that's happened. And, I've had a bunch of people say, oh, it's all Joe Biden's fault. I'm going, but whoa. Didn't we make a beautiful deal? Didn't Mr. Art of the Deal make the beautiful deal, the perfect deal, the incredible deal? How else did we describe that deal with China, the phase one that evidently didn't work? You remember that?
Yeah. Oh, I remember it well. In January of 2019, Trump was, I think called it transformational and said that this was going to be great. It was a 2-year commitment that was made. And so we have all the data in, and all of this is indisputable, by the way. China's supposed to buy $200 billion more worth of products in manufacturing and energy and in agriculture than it did from a 2017 baseline. Well, basically, Rick, they bought zero of that. They fell. They fell more than $200 billion short if you're adding up the export commitments that they made. And so they, in fact, didn't make progress in any way, shape, or form. So even though this was supposed to be some transactional deal, it turned out like a lot of deals that Trump makes, which is you have a big announcement, you think you got a big victory for American workers. Certainly, I'm sure there's some American workers who are pestering you about how great this was going to be, who were Trump supporters. And this turned out to be a big nothing burger. In fact, in many ways, it set us back because it left China off the hook for 2 years. We didn't escalate any tariffs on China. And we didn't address the fundamental issues that are there. And it's not about, necessarily buying this much of manufacturing or this much of agriculture, this much of energy. It's the fact that most of their economy is controlled by the government. And they have massive subsidies. They keep our products out. They, have currency misalignment. And so they have lax labor and environmental standards, as we were just talking about with respect to the car market. And so you add all of this up, and that's hardly a level playing field. And so I hope Biden recognizes this. I know one thing for sure. they realize that unwinding this is not going to be easy. But the thing that I think gives me a little bit of encouragement, Rick, is that I think they do understand that after 45 years of trying to make China more like the West, starting with Nixon's entree over there, I think they finally realized that it's time to kind of give up on that dream that China doesn't want to be like the West in any way. And so we have to learn to beat China from an economic perspective, so that we're not undermined or put at a disadvantage when something like a pandemic rolls around, and so that we don't have the experiences that we've had for the last 2 years for trying to get stuff that we need, or having massive delays for a lot of products that people want too.
Do you find it as interesting as I do that the same people who were Trump cheerleaders back while he was talking about this beautiful deal that raised tariffs that you and I both agreed was part of a strategy that we had hoped that he'd have. I was in no way against the tariffs, hoped they'd work, wanted them to work. Right. Who are now saying Joe Biden should scrap all the tariffs because they're the reason for inflation. They're the reason for our supply chain mess ups. They're the reason for the sun coming up tomorrow, evidently, and it going down at night. If you listen to them, are you surprised? Are you surprised by that?
No, I'm not surprised by hypocrisy. I mean, I'm not surprised by that. I would say, but it is some seriously twisted logic to, on the one hand, say you want to be tougher on China, that Biden's not tough enough, and on the other hand, say a Trump policy is, without calling it a Trump policy, is a primary contributor to inflation. And just, so your listeners know, there's no evidence that the tariffs that Trump put into place and that Biden largely kept have had a measurable impact on inflation. There's lots of things that have. I mean, fuel prices have. Tariffs aren't impacting that at all. But in food prices, and the tariffs really don't impact that at all as well. That's a lot about demand and the change in our buying habits. That's one of the factors. But there was no inflation caused by the tariffs before the pandemic, and so it would be really specious to assume that that's like a big driver of this, and that we should give up the last little bit of leverage we have with China, which are those tariffs, by the way, to try to beat back inflation, when that wouldn't happen at all. It would not have any impact on reducing inflation. But what will is continued stable growth, getting further out of this pandemic. One of the challenges has been that we were buyers of services more than buyers of goods prior to the pandemic. Now we're primarily buyers of goods. A lot of those are imported instead of services. I think that will shift around as we're moving out of this thing, and the factories are getting caught up. I mean, it's taken a while, and you can't just turn back on the switch and expect things to change overnight. But I do think that we've seen the worst of the inflation, and the tariffs just aren't part of that story. So if you want to lose leverage with China, if you want to lose jobs to China, go ahead and take the tariffs off. That'd be a great idea. But if you want to try to have a policy that's going to rebuild manufacturing in this country, the tariffs right now are an element of that, and allowing us to compete more fairly on a level playing field.
No, it's something we desperately need. And look, I was in favor of it when Trump did it. I'm in favor of leaving it. But we also need a better, bigger strategy, because as you pointed out, the big, beautiful plan didn't work. There were no teeth in it. And we're in a moment where if I'm China and I'm looking at the U.S., just as if we're Russia looking at the U.S., I see a divided country. I see a country where everyone on the right wants Joe Biden to fail. So you're just going to hang out long enough because China thinks much more strategically and much more long term than we do. I fear that division puts us in a negative place.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so, I think you're right, but I also see a few green shoots of hope here. and I'll tell you why. I do think that at least from a thinking perspective, if not a policy perspective, that the thinking among conservatives has changed on China, and it has changed among kind of like a lot of national Democrats too, that we were just talking about, and I don't think that's going back. So I think that's an important. And one of the few things that we've gotten done on a bipartisan basis, over the last 5 or 6 months, number one is infrastructure, which is definitely designed to make us more competitive against China. And it also has strong Buy America provisions in it, which will prevent any of that money from leaking out to China. That's number one. Number two is this, in the Senate, it was called the U.S. Innovation and Competitiveness Act. In the House of Representatives, called the America Competes Act. But it's this kind of bold competitiveness legislation. I say bold from a congressional perspective because they just haven't done this before.
Right.
That has some new trade tools, that has some investments in research and development, trying to reshore some supply chains. And so I think, and that had bipartisan support in the Senate. So I do think that it's possible to make progress. But you're right, Rick. There's a lot of politics that stand in the way of this. When we should realize that this is a real threat to our economic, to our national security, and we should rally around good, sensible policies that we know have strong support from voters, if you don't attach a Biden or a Trump label to it, and also are very sensible and would make a big difference in our efforts.
Now, this is one of those things I've been saying for years, could unite the working class of this country. If there's anything that could do it, this could be it. And moving in a direction that we talk about, bringing manufacturing back, taking on our competitiveness globally, and more importantly, the jobs that would be created and the supply chains that we'd be able to create. And oh, by the way, from a national defense standpoint, our ability to weather any storm of the future. It just makes sense to me. But, we are where we are. Last question I've got for you. In looking at this, I keep hearing people saying, I'd love to invest in all this stuff, Scott. We'd love to, build manufacturing. We're just broke. We don't have the money. All this spending, Joe Manchin said, all this spending causing all this inflation. It's like we're using that dreaded I word to justify doing nothing to help us move forward. And I think on the right, I think it's about ensuring that Joe Biden doesn't succeed. But on the left, yeah, I'm still trying to figure out why we're not spending heavily in this moment on reinvesting in manufacturing and infrastructure and the things that we need.
Yeah, it makes no sense, particularly in his state, which desperately needs that kind of investment for better paying jobs for the citizens, as well as some of those policies with respect to childcare that make it easier to get people back into the workforce. This is common sense. I'm far less worried about inflationary aspects than I am about this petering out. And we should learn the lesson that we did from the Great Recession, where we did too little. And it's better to get our house in order now and to make some structural changes that will make us more competitive and that will allow more Americans to participate in this middle class dream as we move ahead. We can't afford to miss this opportunity, right?
No, we can't afford to do it again. And look, I argued we missed it in 2009 and 2010 when we had a chance to really get our economy moving and create those jobs with really low interest spending. We're still on the end of it here, where we could still do big things. Just a matter of pushing and doing the things, getting people to do what we want them to do. But Scott, I appreciate the time as always. Great stuff. Thanks so much.
You bet, Rick. Great to be with you as always. Keep up the great work.
Good stuff. Our good friend Scott Paul. Make sure you check out the work that they're doing at the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Scott is the president there of AAM. If you missed any of the program, podcast, download that. Take it wherever you go. This way you don't ever miss a minute. TheRickSmithShow.com is where you do that, or wherever you get your podcasts. Right back after this.
This mega drought is being made worse because of the human forces here in climate change.
Western U.S. mega drought is the worst in 1,200 years, new report finds.
The future is electric, and this administration is moving toward it at lightning speed.
Biden administration rolls out funds for national EV charging network. Plus,
climate change is arguably the #1 threat to the world now.
Dr. Abel, you are now the #2 threat to the world.
I refuse to be number 2.
Car makers spend big touting new electric vehicles during Super Bowl ads.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
I don't know about you, Trey, but my car doesn't run off fairy dust. My car doesn't run off unicorn urine.
Have you tried just plugging it in, Senator Kennedy? Just curious. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, well, it looks like saber rattling is not good for the world, but it sure seems to be good for the oil and gas companies, don't it?
Yes, it do. Global crude oil prices have already jumped to more than $90 a barrel, the highest since 2014, amid escalating tensions between Russia and Ukraine. Energy analysts warn that a Russian invasion of Ukraine could drive global oil prices to well over $100 a barrel, in turn increasing retail prices at the pump for consumers and prolonging elevated inflation. In the past, high oil prices have tipped the U.S. into recession. Some analysts have projected that the spike in oil and gas prices may speed up the shift to renewable energy, but not so much for those who profit from higher oil prices. A new analysis finds that big banks are still funding new oil and gas projects despite being part of a UN-led group called the Net Zero Banking Alliance. Since joining the Net Zero Banking Alliance last year, 24 banks have provided $33 billion for new oil and gas projects.
What part of net zero do you banks not understand?
Worse, half of that amount came from just 4 of the group's founding members: HSBC, Barclays, BNP Paribas, and Deutsche Bank.
Stop doing business with them.
The International Energy Agency says to meet the target of net zero emissions by 2050, there should be no new oil and natural gas development anymore at all. Meanwhile, the impacts of fossil fuel use continue to mount. A grim new study warns that in the U.S. West, the last 20 years have been the driest in at least 1,200 years, and man-made global warming is making the Western drought more severe. Researchers publishing in the journal Nature Climate Change analyzed tree rings going back to 800 AD, which is as far back as the data goes, and conclude that there would have been a Western drought regardless, but in the absence of climate change, quote, its severity would have been only about 60% of what it was. That's because as temperatures rise, the air pulls more moisture out of the soil and vegetation, making drought conditions much more extreme.
We are really screwing this up.
Previous megadroughts in the 1,200-year record lasted as long as 30 years. The study projects that this one will also likely last as long, taking it to 2030 at least.
So we're about 22 years into the megadrought at this point?
Exactly.
Well, it'll be over soon.
The 56th Super Bowl on Sunday in Los Angeles clocked in as the second hottest ever recorded. L.A. has been gripped by an unusual February heat wave that broke just a few hours before kickoff, falling 1 degree short of the record set in 1973, which was also in Los Angeles. And marking a cultural shift, nearly all of the Super Bowl car commercials focused on all-electric vehicles. 6 out of 7 Super Bowl car ads promoted EVs, according to Cars.com, including this GM ad with comedian Mike Myers appearing as Dr. Evil, and it was the only one to explicitly mention the climate crisis.
We'll reduce our carbon footprint.
Whatever. Okay, let's go. We're going all electric.
Everybody in!
To speed up adoption of electric vehicles in the United States, Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm rolled out the Biden administration's plan for a national EV charging network. Federal agencies will dispense a first round of $5 billion in funding from the bipartisan infrastructure bill to the states, and that first round will place EV fast chargers along interstate highways and major corridors in every state. Secretary Granholm says it's part of the Biden plan to accelerate the shift to clean cars and create jobs.
The federal investment in EV charging is going to go a long way to boost local communities and to create this seamless national network that provides accessible charging for all.
And it can't happen fast enough. For much more on all of those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and...
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, interesting article over at Politico today, pointing out the fact that Democrats just don't seem to want to be fighting, and they don't have a message at this point. And it's something I've been saying for a long time. And it's not. Look, I'm not putting down the Democrats. I'm trying to get them to do something. Don't just sit there. Do something. I forget who that pastor was who used to do that every Sunday morning. But according to the DCCC, what the GOP's doing, these quote-unquote culture wars, they're alarmingly potent, according to the DCCC. And according to Democrats' own research, they've found in battleground states, people think the party is preachy, judgmental, and focused on culture wars, yet they're getting crushed by them. And one of them is this theory of critical something or other that the right has just grabbed onto like a rabid dog. Even though the nonsense they're throwing out isn't happening, it still gets the mass outrage. And as Joe Walsh said earlier, the Republicans are all about getting people angry, even if they're lying about it. I'm here to share some thoughts on, well, where we are and some of the craziness happening in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and the moneyed interest behind it. I've asked Cyril Mychalejko to come talk with us. Cyril is the columnist for the Bucks County Courier Times, the Intelligencer, and more recently for this article, the Bucks County Beacon. Cyril, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me back on.
So, am I getting this right? I'm looking at this report that they've put out that says, "Hey, look, Democrats, you're not getting the message out. You're not fighting on this well enough." Are you finding that?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the establishment types, and then just maybe some from party regulars. Who are running it on an organizational level, I don't think they've caught up with the activists on the ground and the grassroots and the rank and file who have been sounding the alarm about this, well past the last year or so. And especially, with these school board races where you've seen this like nationwide, concerted effort by different right-wing and far-right organizations to kind of infiltrate these boards, and I would say, gut public education from within.
Yeah, I've been saying it's not about anything but privatizing, profitizing, and prioritizing who gets an education. And to me, that's the end goal in this. But I go back to something I said a minute ago that the right doesn't care if they have their facts right, because hey, they live in the world of alternative facts. Even if they're making stuff up and lying, it's still about the narrative. And one of the things you write about in your piece is a local woman wearing a Moms for Liberty sweatshirt. Saying that the teacher in the classroom lined up all the kids by shade, I guess, from whitest to blackest, and made the white kids apologize to the black kids. Did that actually happen?
No, that did not. And what's disturbing is like when someone irresponsibly lies like that, right? This gets picked up by, not just like social media, but by the right-wing echo chamber, which includes Fox News. So this lie becomes national, and you have reaching all these people with some really serious kind of mental issues. And for example, the collateral damage from this lie is that someone left a message at this elementary school, and this gentleman who claimed to be from Las Vegas threatened to rape the teacher, and that there would be heads swinging from poles because he was outraged that this thing happened at the school, which actually did not happen.
I mean, what gives people and this is what's interesting to me, because I saw the video from Virginia, the woman who said, my child's not going to wear a mask and I'm coming with guns. What gives people the sense that they can say these things and not be held accountable? It's almost like there's a sense in their mind of lawlessness, that they have some kind of super uber privilege to be able to say this kind of stuff with no repercussion. Look, I'm sure you and I get the same kind of email from people who say the most outrageous, crazy stuff. And look, I'm in a position where I expect it. What I do here, this is expected. But a teacher does not. A teacher goes to the classroom and gives 100% of his or her best, and to their own detriment and their own financial stability in a lot of cases. And this is the kind of treatment that they get. I don't think any of them signed up for that.
No, I mean, it's sick. There's something like seriously wrong. And the Republican Party has to kind of choose right now whether or not they want to continue to condone this type of behavior, which is essentially inciting what I would call domestic terrorism. Like that's a terroristic threat that's made at this, that was made at this school. Or are they going to have any kind of principles whatsoever and just kind of like, stand up, speak out, and tell these people to stand down and completely disassociate with the ones that refuse to. And this Moms for Liberty group, I mean, this isn't the first time that they've engaged, in this type of behavior. So this group, this nationwide group with chapters all across the country, was actually started by a mom who lost an election in a school board, right? So she was unhappy with that democracy, played out in her election. And what she did was that her group started targeting the person who defeated her, would actually organize protests outside of this woman's house in Brevard, Florida. Right. And the Washington Post reported on this. The woman who was being targeted actually wrote an op-ed about it. I'm a Florida school board member. This is how protesters come after me. One anti-masker, she said, be careful, your mommy hurts little kids. A group of about 15 people shot at pedophiles as neighbors walk their dogs, pushing their infants in strollers. Another said, we're coming for you. These people are sick, right? And they're dangerous. And they keep framing it in these kind of, one, they frame it in lies. Two, they frame it in this like apocalyptic type of language. Like anything the Democrats are doing are kind of like destroying the country. It equates to child abuse. I mean, we've even had Reopen Bucks, which is a local group here that's, against any kind of COVID mitigations, against masking. I mean, they filed a lawsuit suggesting that masking was a satanic ritual, right? So they're pushing this out there. And then there's people that actually believe this. And the people who believe this, obviously, they don't have the most, let's say, common sense or the best mental faculties. So these are the ones who actually think, oh my God, these satanic pedophiles are trying to brainwash our kids and destroy our country. Well, they're the ones that are going to make threats and, God forbid, actually follow through with them.
Yeah, and they use a heavy dose of religious zealotry to sell all of it together, so that the word you kept using is believe. They believe, so facts don't matter. Alternative facts or otherwise don't matter, because they're the I believe crowd. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show here with Cyril Mychalejko. He is a freelance columnist over at the Bucks County Courier Times, the Intelligencer, and also the Bucks County Beacon. We'll get links out on social media how you can check out the work that he does there. If you're just joining us, make sure you grab the podcast. Never miss a second of the program. You can do that at thericksmithshow.com or at your favorite podcast host site. Now, for me, it comes back down to the money. There's a lot of money in religion. There's a lot of money in grifting. There also these Moms for Liberty groups, well-funded. Do we know where the money for this is coming from? Do we know who the billionaires who are funding this stuff are? Do we have a sense of the direction? Because look, this didn't just pop up. These weren't a bunch of soccer moms who thought, oh, gee, I think we're going to start a group today. This was a well-funded operation. I'm curious if you have any ideas.
Yeah, I mean, with them specifically, there's no clear-cut answer. They, like you said, like they claim to be a grassroots group, but everyone knows that they're getting money. They've suggested they have donors, which like help them pay for like these packets that people can buy for $60. They try to suggest that like all their money comes from like T-shirt sales, right? Which is just like that's just, not true again. If we're talking about some of the other groups that are kind of involved, I think it's like the usual suspects with like the Koch brothers. You have the Manhattan Institute with Christopher Rufo, and him peddling this whole like anti-critical race theory lie, which kind of plays into part of the political lies that groups like Moms for Liberty are kind of pushing to kind of like whip their membership up into a frenzy that, schools are teaching this like graduate level kind of course for K through 12 students. And then just kind of like conflating that with, diversity, equity, inclusion efforts or any kind of actual teaching and retelling of, history and some of the sins that our country has committed with regards to like race relations. But it also kind of like robs students of the experience of talking about like the progressive movements that pushed back against the racism and the civil rights movement and all the kind of like robust progressive protests and actions and mobilizations that come with that.
So is there any movement counter to this? I mean, are we seeing in as you're following this, are there, I've been saying, look, these are the minority. These are the loud minority. These are the well-funded minority. These are the folks who are off on the radical fringe. Is the silent majority finally coming around and pushing back? Do you see any of that? Do you see any of it possible? And to end where we started, the Democrats don't seem to have a cogent message on how to fight back on this. Do you see anything that moves us in a direction where that happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Democratic Party needs to start work. They should have been working on this over the past year and a half, right? So they're late to the game. We don't have the money that's being kind of like pushed in to help with these progressive causes or groups or progressive pushback to counter this far right, dangerous kind of deceitful lies and movements that are looking to kind of take over, local school boards, local governance, and, essentially work their way up. I do see like, parents on the ground are becoming more organized, at least here in Bucks County, I'm seeing that. And just as a matter of, just to clarify, is that these threats that happened to the one school based on this lie about like lining kids up, that happened in neighboring like Montgomery County, but which is like right next door and part of the same congressional district. But yeah, like you're seeing more parents go to the meetings. You see them more organized and then speaking out and countering the lies, the misinformation, and just the at times like QAnon quackery that these different groups and their members are pushing out. But this needs to translate into some kind of like cogent electoral strategy as well. And this is where like the Democratic Party, especially like the local parties and the countywide parties and state parties, I think this is where they need to step up and just, you know, put their money where their mouth is and actually start like doing the work and just kind of like pounding the pavement and listening to the parents that have been pushing back against this far right onslaught and attack on public schools, and listening to what they've been having to deal with and what they've been doing either individually or collectively within like local community groups on the ground.
Yeah, a lot of work to do, but Cyril, I appreciate the time. Good stuff. Keep up the great work. We'll make sure that people check out your piece over at the Bucks County Beacon. We'll get links out there. But Cyril, thanks so much, man.
Hey, thanks, Rick.
Good stuff. Cyril Mychalejko. Make sure you check out his work. We'll get links out on social media, how you do just that. I'm curious, thoughts, you know, do you see this kind of stuff happening in your school district? Do you see this stuff, you know, percolating in your school board meetings? What would you do if someone came up with this fanciful story of the teacher lined up all of the kids from whitest to blackest and then made each one of the white kids apologize? Would you believe that? Because this is what the right-wing crazy groups, this is what they bought. They're selling this stuff in mass, which is why we're seeing the gag orders popping up, which is why we're seeing all of the things about, hey, we need to have cameras in schools. Hey, we need to have, you know, all of this draconian crackdown on educators because we don't want our kids to think about anything else. And, you know, here's the problem that I have in all this. If someone were to come to me and say, you know, these were elementary school kids that they were talking about. If someone would have come to me and said, you know, Rick, you know, Mrs. So-and-so, your kid's, you know, third grade teacher, she did this. And I go, no, she wouldn't. I know her. We've been to her classroom. We've done work in her classroom. We've been part of that. No, I don't believe that at all. And then I would reach out to her and I would ask directly, hey, I've heard this. You know, is this true? And then I would of course be chastised for, how could you believe such a thing? I would never do such a thing like that. This is the incredible part of what the right gets away with. They get away with throwing out these bizarre lies that gets, you know, just regurgitated ad nauseum. And then, well, they never have to retract it. And if they do it, so I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it. Now, while they're on the mountain on top, screaming at the top of their lungs to anyone who will listen that this horrible atrocity happened. And then when they're wrong, well, you know, oops. And this is the Republican Party as a whole. This is the difference in parties. When people say, oh, Rick, the Democrats and the Republicans, they're the same thing. No. When was the last time you ever heard a Republican apologize? I can't remember when that happened. And if it was, you know, a halfway one. I hear Democrats are apologizing all the time. Stacey Abrams the other day didn't wear a mask. She did a whole tour. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Hey, it happened. Move on. Stop apologizing. Ball up your digits, get in there, mix it up. I'm tired of weak-kneed, spineless messaging. Get out there and fight. We're at a moment of opportunity to transform this country back into a manufacturing powerhouse. We're at a moment where we can bring a country together and solve some of our historical problems. But will we? No, we're going to continue to make them worse. Because we've got a party that's willing to burn the house to the ground. And sadly, a lot of it comes back to this toxic mix of racism, of hyper zealotry and religiosity. And I point to this pastor, I can't even call him a pastor. I mean, this is outrageous. This guy, Greg Locke, and you may remember I talked about him about a week or two ago, where he was burning books. Now, I guess he needs a little more attention. I guess he didn't get enough attention from the right wing, you know, celebrating how wonderful he is, that he burnt books about gay children. Now, according to him, according to one of his ordeals, one of these 2-minute videos from his February 13th spiel, evidently, according to him, there are witches in his congregation. Witches have infiltrated his church. 6 of them, by the way, and 3 of them happen to be right then and there. Oh my gosh. You better look in my eyeballs, he said. We're not afraid of you stinking witches. You devil-worshipping Satanist witch. Oh my gosh. Now here's the scary part. Here's the scary part. Now understand, I know witches. They're good people. I like witches. Here's the part that I find scary. Much like my friend who was the guy who reached in the box to pick up the snake, because the Bible said to handle snakes, and when he got bitten, they had the antidote right there, the anti-venom right there to make sure that he didn't die. I'm kind of concerned that crazy people are going to start burning people at the stake because, well, this lunatic, someone who they've put on a stage and they put up on a pedestal as a man of God, is saying that there's a witch among us. Does it seem like we're going back into really crazy, arcane, way back into the, well, I guess into a time where you didn't need to be all that bright? There are times I'm very rarely at a loss for words. Burning witches at the stake in this day and age, and having someone who, I guess the part that I'm most amazed by is that people show up to this, and I may, just out of morbid curiosity, but I can't believe people give this guy money. And this is the weird part of where we are in this country. Our extreme Trumpkins, the Believe crowd, you're never going to tell them anything because they've been trained for the last couple of decades to believe that any Democrat is evil. Not just bad, not just has bad policy, not just, however you want to frame it, doesn't care about, business or doesn't care about this or that, but downright evil. There was a time, and look, this is the reason I have people like Joe Walsh on the program, is Joe and I don't agree on anything politically. I doubt that there is a policy initiative that we could sit down and be 100% in agreement on. Do I believe over a couple of beers and maybe some arm wrestling and smacking each other around we could come to some kind of a compromised agreement? Sure, I'm sure that could happen. But not voluntarily. But the one thing that we agree on wholeheartedly, and this is where true patriots, not the fall patriots that we see waving their Trump flag or their Confederate flag and saying how much they love America, wearing the flag underwear, which, again, I guess I read the flag code, and they didn't bother in those schools. Instead of having gun training courses, how about we go back to reading the flag code again? If you really want to be jingoistic and make everyone pledge to it, maybe you should have some reverence for it and understand why you do what you do, not wear flag underwear. And certainly don't have flag toilet paper, which I have seen, by the way, which is twisted and bizarre and a violation from here until whenever. But these are the people who they believe. They believe they're being patriotic because they've been sold this, because it's all they've saturated their mind with. You listen to right-wing hate radio, you listen to the chaos merchants long enough, you listen to the grievance factory, you are going to be an angry soul. And look, every person I know who consumes it, and it is powerful, they wake up in the morning angry. They want to tear things down. Whereas Democrats, I want to build stuff up. I want to make opportunities better for people. I want opportunity for you, for me, for everyone. I want to build a better tomorrow for ourselves and for our kids. Just me. If you missed any of the program, podcast, ricksmithshow.com. That's where you get it. Share it with your friends. Subscribe. Do all of that. Wherever you get your favorites, do that. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1950. That was the day the Red Scare took its toll on the U.S. labor movement. The Congress of Industrial Organizations expelled the International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers for their alleged communist ties. Although small in numbers, communist organizers had played an important role in building the large industrial unions that were the core of the CIO. During the CIO's 1949 convention, this anti-communist hysteria was on full display. There, the CIO delegates decided to bar any individual with communist affiliations from serving as union officers. Their panic did not stop there, as the CIO leadership also voted to revoke the charters of unions they deemed too closely aligned with the communists. Immediately, the convention threw out the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers. During the 1950s, more unions were caught up in the purge, including the International Union of Longshoremen and Warehousemen. In all, the anti-communist frenzy saw 11 unions ousted from the House of Labor. According to a report to Congress by the Department of Labor, the cause of these expulsions was that the union's, quote, espousal of Soviet Russia became increasingly distasteful to the CIO leadership and rank-and-file membership. Cold War fear-mongering had effectively isolated the most left-leaning unions in the country. The impact on the labor movement was long-lasting. After the purge, unions took a much more moderate stance on things like civil rights. This hampered their organizing efforts in the South. To this day, there is less union representation in southern states. It also pushed the CIO closer to the Democratic Party and paved the way for the CIO's reunification with the more politically moderate American Federation of Labor.
In this year's Olympics, the top team performance has been corporate America's breathtaking double-twist ethical backflip. This group of corporate giants loudly tout their code of ethics, pledging to stand against repressive regimes that abuse human rights. But here came the Beijing Olympics, posing a direct test, and they flopped. Human rights advocates worldwide had asked that corporations withhold their sponsorship of the propagandistic use of the Olympics by China's brutally oppressive rulers. CEOs were simply asked not to endorse a Chinese dictatorship that is routinely committing acts of genocide and political suppression against Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kong citizens, and others under their rule. Corporate leaders would not even have to speak out or publicly stand up to the oppressors. Just don't show up. Don't pay millions of their shareholders' dollars to link arms and reputations with rank repression. Well, if you've watched any of the Olympic broadcasts, you've seen which side corporate America chose. They've done a collective backflip from the high ethical bar of human rights into the pits of crass, unprincipled commercialism. A who's who of America's corporate all-stars are flying their flags in Beijing, having paid more than $1 billion to strut their stuff as sponsors of the regime's Olympic show. It looks bad, though, to admit that they value money over humanity, so sponsors are piously proclaiming that sports should not be politicized. As one put it, offending China's autocrats, quote, would not advance the cause of sport in which our commitment lies. Really? How sporting is genocide? Another barked that, quote, nobody cares what happens to Uyghurs, okay? No, it's not okay, and also not true. Yet another declared ski and sport have no business in politics. It's common sense. This is Jim Hightower saying, no, it's cowardice.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So one of the crazier lawsuits that I've seen come out in a very long time. George Zimmerman was suing. Get this straight. George Zimmerman trying to sue Trayvon Martin's parents for $100 million. I mean, that's got to be one of those Mike Myers moments where, I won $100 million. It's a crazy number. But the judge threw it out saying that, he had no grounds. But I guess in this country, in this day and age, you can sue anybody for anything. You kill their kid, and then, yeah, you know what? You said bad things about me. I'm now going to sue you. Crazy, crazy times we live in. And look, this is I think this is just filtering down from the political world we live in. And I hope at some point it gets better, but here's some craziness on the political front. I've asked Zach Cunning to come talk with us. Zach is a multimedia journalist over at Heartland Signal. You want to check out the work that they do. Heartlandsignal.com is their website. Zach, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me on, Rick. Good to be here.
So, ever since the Martin thing, ever since the Trayvon Martin and the George Zimmerman thing, I think the country's gone nuts on the gun front. We find every which way we can kill each other. And more recently, there's been this, and I love the fact that it is Senate Bill 666. I don't think you could have written this any better for it to be such an evil piece of legislation. But they've dubbed it in Missouri as the License to Murder Bill. Where are we at with this? What's going on?
So thankfully, this bill did die in committee. And I do want to set something straight that was being not quite fully borne out in some of the other reporting on this. And that is, this was not a bill that shifted the entire burden off of the defendant, or rather shifting the burden off the defendant to say, hey, I was in self-defense and forcing the state to prove a negative. That was already happening. What this bill would have created was a presumption of reasonableness, effectively tying law enforcement's hands from minute one of an investigation. And so, like I said, thankfully, this bill, the bill with the number of the beast, did die in committee. However, there is another bill that is completely identical. It is Senate Bill 1104. That has not been assigned to committee yet. So technically, this bill is still in play, just under a new name.
Oh, no, look, I'm sure there are going to be plenty after this, because I'm still trying to figure out, what happened in our society. And I've been saying for a long time, and I look at the Zimmerman case and the reason I started with this as a society, we've lost our collective minds. When I was a kid, you started a fight with somebody and they kicked your behind, you got your butt kicked, and everyone said you deserved it. Don't do it again. You'll learn that lesson. Now we've got this mentality that we can, because we have a gun, we can go get into any altercation, do anything we want to do without fear of any repercussion. And I think that's dangerous on so many levels, but it does then encourage people who want to be vigilantes, who want conflict, who want to be Charles Bronson back in the 70s. I think it's a horrible path to go on.
And, Rick, to build on that a little, I think there's also been almost a death of responsibility in this country and in the concept of civic responsibility. I grew up around firearms. I grew up actually in Missouri, but safety and respect for those was paramount. And I don't see that being pushed anymore the way it was even when I was a kid.
Yeah, but where I grew up, and I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland, if you saw somebody walking down the street with a gun, duck, someone's dying. Yeah. I now live in a neighborhood. Well, that was the thing, is no one walked around the street with guns when I was a kid. And even back in my hometown, now they do. Now, see, there's an excellent point. Because now I live in a neighborhood where you see people with guns all the time, and they're probably going to the free gun range. There's a different culture. There are different things in different places. But our laws don't bother to differentiate between. And I still think the bar has to be really high before you pull that gun out and you take somebody's life. I just don't think that it should be, oh, well, hey, I was afraid. He said mean words to me, and I wasn't sure. I'll give you an example. For some reason, I was involved in a road rage incident. A guy comes running up to my window and is yelling everything that he could have possibly imagined at me, other than that I'm a decent human being. And I came on the air the next day and go, could I have shot him? Would I have been within my legal right? Because I was clearly in fear of my life. My child was there. Who knows what this crazy person was? Could I have shot him right in the face, dead, right there? Currently under Pennsylvania law, not quite so much. You haven't quite met the threshold under Pennsylvania law, and really under most states' laws, because all states, Missouri included, although this bill would have made an incredibly hard thing to prosecute, all states do have a bar that's called objective reasonableness when you are dealing with a self-defense incident, right?
And the idea is when an objectively reasonable person in that situation have taken the same action you did. The problem with the Missouri bills is they create a presumption of reasonableness. The prosecution now has to prove that you were not acting reasonably instead of the defendant having to prove that they were acting reasonably. And as anyone who's ever taken a debate class knows, it's virtually impossible to prove a negative.
And that's the reason I brought that up, because I know I can't shoot him in the face like that. But given laws like this, but here's the thing, years ago, 20 years ago, you'd have told me that I could have gotten into a fight with somebody and then somebody starts to beat me up and I could shoot and kill them and that would be okay. I would have told, no, that doesn't happen. It happens today. And that's how these law changes change our culture. And that's why I think these are bad things. Just my thought. I want to move on into Michigan, where some fun and entertainment in the great state of Michigan, where you have this Ryan Kelly, candidate for Michigan's governor. This is kind of that gun thing to the next level. This patriot wannabe. I'm gonna defend our elections. Walk me through what happened at his event last Saturday.
So at this event, it was a relatively small event I can't remember the name of the county in Michigan, but a county level campaign event for himself and for Mr. I believe his name is Mike Detmer. Yep, Mike Detmer, who's running for state senate. And they got into this whole, how do we secure the election? How do we make sure the election's legit? Of course, the election was legitimate. Every challenge to it has been thrown out by the various judges, but they're convinced otherwise. And so they're instructing people on how to become poll watchers. And it almost came off they were trying to teach them to infiltrate the election. And at one point, Mr. Kelly comes out and says, look, if you see something you don't like happening with the machines, if you see something going on, unplug it from the wall. And he actually verbatim, he tells the crowd, take control of the narrative. So his crowd's getting amped up. And then a while later, a person asked, the two of them were standing in front of the crowd with a pair of microphones, and a person asked, how do we prevent what happened to TCF in Detroit from occurring again? TCF was, of course, where they were counting those absentee ballots, and there were some people who got very unruly, and the police were forced to remove some people. And Mike Detmer's response to this, he looks right at the attendee and says, "Are you armed?" And starts telling them that's what they need to be. He starts encouraging them to carry firearms at these polling places.
That not a crime to do that already?
Oh, it certainly is.
He's encouraging people to go criming and
he says, again, this is a quote, this is in the story here on heartlandsignal.com. It says, so you ask, what can you do? Show up armed.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Is he going to pay the bail of all these nitwits that may end up, because there's a big sign right there, at least at my polling place. And I guess maybe some don't read, but and I think there was a picture and an X through it. This guy's running for Senate, but here again, I guess what this brings me to is this is a predictable next step. And all of the talk from Trump and all of the talk of stolen elections of the past, this is a predictable next step for the gun crowd, who, everything is water the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants and patriots. It's all that. And there's part of me that goes, and maybe you'll agree or disagree, that this is what folks seem to really want and have been fetishizing for so long, that they're finally getting the opportunity to really say the quiet parts out loud.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that when incredibly racist and sexist and bigoted terminology and verbiage suddenly started once again becoming commonplace under the previous administration. In certain areas, suddenly certain words that groups that you and I, the white people, just absolutely undeniably were not allowed to say, they started coming back out. So there's a progression that you can follow here.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy the place that we're in. I mean, for me, and I don't know about you, but for me, when I saw on January 6th the Confederate flag, being walked through our Capitol, that was kind of an angering all of it was angering, but nothing more than that. And that'll be one of those things that sticks with me. And you see it showing up in all of the wrong places. Because look, as an acquaintance of mine says, the South will rise again. And there's this mindset out there that this is that moment, which is really frightening to me. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're here with Zach Cunning. Zach's a multimedia journalist over at Heartland Signal. You want to check out the work that they do, check out the website, heartlandsignal.com. We'll get links out on social media. If you're just joining us, make sure you download the podcast so you never miss a second of the program. You can do that at thericksmithshow.com or anywhere where you get your podcasts. At the end of this, our political space all over. I mean, where I'm at in Pennsylvania, oh boy, Senate and gubernatorial races, nothing but insanity and craziness. In fact, you had the guy over the Super Bowl weekend running the Let's Go Brandon ads. And then you got the Dr. Oz character. It's almost like no serious person would ever run for political office again because of the clowns and the freak shows that are running right now. At least in our neck of the woods. I want to go to Minnesota. That wasn't really a question. That was just my commentary. And thanks for not jumping all over that. You've got a former Minnesota sheriff who's running for governor there. And look, we've got our crazies here. But this guy, he back into that place you were moving towards, wanting to say the quiet parts out loud, wanting to revive ugly language of the past. What's going on with this guy? Rich Stanek, I guess his name is?
Rich Stanek, good old Rich Stanek. So all the way back, we're going to go all the way back to the very late 80s. And issue, I believe this incident, the early 90s. 1981 is when the civil suit was filed, but the incident happened in 1989 when Stanek was working an off-duty security job. He was with the Minneapolis police at the time. He's driving, motorist T-bones him. He gets out of his vehicle. This point counts start to differ, but he ends up being sued because the motorist accuses him of breaking out his driver's side window, bodily pulling him from the vehicle, and brutally beating him while yelling and screaming all sorts of racial slurs at the man.
Wow.
It was an African-American man hitting Rich Stanek, who's a white police officer. So he, in a deposition, when his suit is filed in 1991, in deposition in 1992, Stanek admits to using this language, not so much necessarily in that specific instance, but in the course of police duties around other officers at home. Says eventually, well, if I don't use it, I maybe don't use it at work, but if it's at home, it's my business. I can say it if I'm on my own time. Fast forward to today. He's doing an interview with a local outlet in that area with KSTP, and starts trying to wholeheartedly deny it. Says, no, I never said that. I never said any of that. But we've got the receipts.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird that you would deny it now. You go, okay, yeah, that was something in the past. Isn't this one of those moments where, look, if you're my age, I'm sure you've used it, because, where I grew up, it was commonplace. Although I was the only white kid in an all-black neighborhood, so it was flung around a lot at me. But this is one of those moments where you go, hey, I didn't know any better at the time. I've learned, some kind of an excuse like that. Now just, bold-faced, about-face. Nope, never did it. I don't know. I wasn't that guy in the deposition. Is that what we're getting?
I mean, it's interesting, and it's hard to follow where he's going with it to a degree, because he says, oh, the deposition's out there, you can go see the deposition, but I never said it, but he acknowledges saying it in the deposition.
Crazy stuff. I do want to get to a couple other things real quick before I let you go. You've got an attorney general race in Minnesota, and I'm not sure what's going on in Minnesota, but this Lynn Torgerson, I guess her name is, she's trying to recreate what happened on January 6th, and she actually calls the two staffers that were there, her two staffers that were there on January 6th, she's kind of recreating them as heroes now. She said it seems that the election of Joe Biden was somewhat of a coup, and that the person who won president was Trump. Doubling down on that, but also solidifying that narrative that we're persecuting those people, that those rioters, those people who walked the Confederate flag through our nation's capital, No, they weren't insurrectionists. They were heroes. They were heroes, Zach.
Well, don't you know, Rick, it was legitimate political discourse.
And there it is, legitimate political discourse. Last question I got for you, because I don't know what's going on with the craziness of our politicians, but I can't let someone go without talking about Ron Johnson.
Oh my gosh, our favorite over here at Heartland.
Did Ron Johnson actually say that while he was in office, his wealth is only doubled, while the average Americans has, I guess, 3.8 times? I don't know where you get 3.8. I'm not sure where that came from, which orifice he popped that out of. But claiming that the average American is 3.8 times wealthier during that period, is that an accurate statement?
You know, I'm not an economist, and neither, by the way, is Ron Johnson. So I don't know whether the average American's wealth went up 3.8% since he's been in office. I would be surprised if his only went up by a factor of 2. But
I'm sorry, before let me cut you off. I made a mistake in that. Not 3.8%, 3.8 times. His wealth doubled. I'm sorry, I screwed that up.
It's all good.
Because now that I go back and look at it, no, 3.8%. That maybe 3.8 times, almost 4 times. So if you had $1 when he started office, you now have 4. I know no one whose wealth has accumulated that amazingly over his tenure in Senate, yet his doubled.
Well, and that's the thing. Why do we have politicians who are focused on the size of their wealth while they're in office in the first place? That, you know, I mean, yes, we would all like to make more money in this country, but on top of that, he is quite a wealthy man. His wealth is doubled. And yet he's opposed to, state funds for childcare. He's saying, well, that's not my responsibility for my tax dollars to go over there. You're a wealthy man, but you don't want to help the rest of us. You don't want to help your constituents. He also said that Wisconsin has enough jobs. And if this Oshkosh Corp that's making the new Postal Service trucks wants to go to one of the Carolinas for their manufacturing, well, my state's got plenty of jobs. So...
that's like being the guy I brought home the bacon, but I let the neighbors eat it.
There you go.
I hope the voters in Wisconsin remember that. That should be every commercial that's ever run, just that comment, because I'm sure there are a lot of struggling families in Wisconsin, as there are in Pennsylvania and all across this country, where we don't need another elitist senator. And I know there are a couple here running in Pennsylvania. I know they seem to be everywhere. And it's important that we point out what they're doing, and it's important that the work that you guys do at Heartland Signal, and I hope folks will take a look at it, keep it on their daily watch list. But Zach, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Good stuff.
All right, Rick, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Zach Cunning, multimedia journalist there at Heartland Signal, heartlandsignal.com. The website. Can take a quick break. If you've missed any portion of the program thus far, grab the podcast. You can do that at the website or wherever you get your podcast. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1918. That was the day 300 commercial laundresses in Kansas City walked off the job demanding a union. Male laundry delivery drivers successfully organized the previous summer. They joined the women on the picket lines. The Employers Association had financed an open shop drive since the beginning of the war. The laundry companies refused to grant wage increases to the drivers. They also refused to acknowledge the women's demand for a union. The Women's Trade Union League tried to hold hearings about the strike at the Hotel Muehlbach, but the hotel refused to allow striking black workers into the building. As a result, their white co-workers refused to testify. When the hearings were finally moved, the women told of intolerable conditions. Laundresses complained of filthy workplaces and potential fire traps. They reported that laundry owners had put together their own private police force. These guns for hire assaulted women strikers, breaking one woman's arm, another's wrist, and injuring many more in hopes of deterring them from pressing on with their demands. In the 6th week of the strike, 25,000 more Kansas City workers called a general strike. According to historian Maureen Weiner Greenwald, they supported the laundry workers' demands for increased wages, union recognition, and enforcement of state regulations regarding hours and working conditions. Greenwald notes the general strike was relatively peaceful until the Kansas City Railway attempted to run streetcars with scab labor. Finally, the laundry companies agreed to union recognition and later promised wage increases. They soon reneged, but the show of solidarity among workers provided key lessons for future labor struggles in Kansas City. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any of our program, grab the podcast there at the website or wherever you grab your podcast. This month in particular, you don't want to miss our Black History Month podcast series. Back in 2015, we did this incredible civil rights tour with the program, and some amazing interviews and conversations, and showed up at a bunch of places of historical note where there are now museums. Oddly enough, poor treatment tourism, as we almost dubbed it. If we treated somebody poorly, there's now a museum, and there's probably a Denny's I shouldn't say Denny's. There's now probably a chain franchise restaurant very nearby saying, hey, come see us. How crazy that is. But by all means, check out our Black History Month podcast. And look, normally I don't get involved in Black History Month, not my lane as an old white guy. But this month, this year in particular, something I think really timely. Simply because we're in this crazy moment, like we talked about in the last segment. You've got candidates who have said it, no, I didn't, and then want to say it, and it's just this weird world we're in. I'm hoping at some point. I hope at some point that things do turn around. Peter Thiel, I remember Peter Thiel. He was one of the money men for the former guy. Also, one of the people who thinks we should basically burn down all federal institutions and basically scrap the country and start over, and funding candidates, mostly all Republicans, to do just that. Evidently, he's throwing $1.5 million into a new conservative dating app. It's going to be called The Right Stuff. Oh God, it's The Right Stuff. I gotta imagine that it's going to be a bunch of incel guys just hanging around, talking about how much women don't like them. The $1.5 million, there's part of me that wonders if that's going to be to pay porn stars to go on there and talk nice to people. It's going to be kind of like an OnlyFans for dating. You're not getting a second base, but at least somebody will talk to you for a second, and that's what you'll sign up and pay your dollars for. I can't wait to see for it. But they said while it isn't political itself, the app will be catered to conservatives living primary in big progressive cities. Yeah, there is that. What? No Klan rally? No Klan rallies? None of that to go around? Well, there you go. The Right Stuff. Make sure when it comes out, you can get the sign up. How bizarre. How bizarre. I mean, seriously, how bizarre does this get to? And when do you go, when can we turn all this stuff in? When can we get rid of all this nonsense? When does it end? Amazing. Now, I do want to go back to this story from Michigan, because this is serious. This Ryan Kelly and the Senate candidate, the state Senate candidate, this Mike Detmer. This Kelly's running for Michigan governor, telling poll watchers, if you don't like what's going on, here's his quote: if you see something you don't like happening with the voting machines, if you see something going on, unplug it from the wall. Take control of the narrative. This is a crime. What he's telling people to do is criminal activity. But that's okay because they don't believe that laws apply to them. And this is the narrative for the entire right wing, because this is where people then turn January 6th into, no, they weren't criminals. No, they weren't insurrectionists. No, they weren't partaking in a coup attempt. No, they weren't useful dupes in Trump's attempt to overthrow the ballot box. No, they weren't idiots who were being used like the useful morons that they are. No, it wasn't that. No, these are patriots. These are people who stood up to the face of oppression. And they keep telling themselves over and over and over again because they want to be martyrs. There's this fantasy. I'm water the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants and patriots. The patriots part, they view themselves until that moment comes. Because if you noticed all of the people who got arrested in January 6th, how many of them stood up and said, damn right I did it, and I do it again. I'm proud of what I did. How many of them did that? Oh, no, all of them were, oh, no, please. I didn't know what I was doing. Oh, I was lost. I was just looking for the bathroom. Even the guy who was the head thing, he's like, I thought Trump was going to pardon us. And I go, that's your first mistake. You thought Trump was actually going to pardon you. I mean, that's the hysterical part in all this. But, here we are. Got amazing times and stuff. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.